So let me start by saying what an absolute honor and privilege it is for me to be here this morning. You know, Mr. John kind of hit on it when he called me. Truthfully, a lot of times I get calls to come and do some type of comedy, far more than even talking about legal aspects. And so when Mr. John called and said, look, I'd like for you to come and be the keynote speaker for the 2020 Champions of Justice, I was surprised because of all that we've been through in 2020. Again, I thought he was calling me to come maybe do some comedy, and I wasn't that far off. He said, well, I'd like you to maybe shine some light on the dark days that we're currently going through. So as he mentioned, and some of you may or may not know, I've been doing professional clean Cajun comedy for about 17 years. Some people find that very strange. Being a politician, that kind of goes hand in hand. But once you get to the bench, some people say, well, you know, being a judge and doing comedy doesn't really seem to go together. And I will tell you, I don't disagree with that. The initial reaction when someone hears, well, he's a judge, but he also does comedy, oftentimes is confusion. Like, what do you mean? What type of thing? You know, how does that work? How is that not professional? And if you would just bear with me, I'm going to get to that. So trying to give a keynote speech during 2020, as you can imagine, is much more difficult than it has been in previous years because we've been affected so much. So last night when I was preparing what to talk about, my wife actually said, you look nervous for this. She says, you don't get nervous. And I said, well, I actually am, because the people I'm going to be talking to are the people I typically judge. And undoubtedly, they're going to be judging me this morning on how I do. So that's a little bit more pressure than what I'm used to. So when I sat down to think about what I was going to say this morning and what can I say that's going to do anything for the attorneys in the Acadiana area, specifically those that are going to be recognized this morning, as it's often happened in the past, I always go back to my comfort blanket. And my comfort blanket has always been, for probably over 20 years, comedy and humor. It's just part of me. So I'd like to tell you exactly what I mean about always going back to comedy and humor, and what exactly does that have to do with attorneys being recognized this morning, specifically for their community service. Again, please bear with me. I hope to have this all make sense and make a full circle when it gets there. So I got involved in Cajun comedy as a way of relieving stress, the stress of actually practicing law, but more so it actually started when I was in law school. And I'd like to briefly tell you how that came about, because it's going to make sense and tie into who we're recognizing this morning. I know nobody thinks that's going to happen, but I promise you it's going to tie it back in. So I got involved in doing professional comedy in 2003. The reason I remember that, my last year of law school. And as many in the Acadiana area remember, there used to be a event held at the Hyman Center, which was a Cajun All-Star event that was nonprofit put on as a way to give up funds for Goodwill. And so in 2003, my wife and I went to that. I had always heard about it. It had been going on for many years at that point. And as we sat down, the program, there were 5 comedians. Now, I would tell you, I always think I had a sense of humor, but never considered myself a comedian. Okay. So as we're sitting there, I'm looking through the program, and the program lists the 5 comedians who are going to perform that evening. And all 5 of them had been past winners of what was then called the International Cajun Joke Telling Contest. It was held in Opelousas at the Yambly Festival building. They would have a contest, usually really anywhere from 700 to 1,000 people would show up, and it was just a huge event. So I remember sitting next to my wife, and let me stop here. My wife does not remotely think I'm funny, okay? So I leaned to her, and I remember this, 2003. I said, I'd love to see how I could get into that contest and be able to do it. And like it was yesterday, I remember her looking at me, putting her head down. She says, I hope you never find out how to enter that contest. Now, why? It has nothing to do with whether I'm funny or not. To her, she knew if I did, it would consume me, I would stay focused, and I would do everything I could to win this contest. So approximately 2 weeks later, I saw it advertised in the newspaper. They were looking for contestants. Well, what did I do? I did the right thing. I didn't tell my wife, but I did call. And I said, okay, look, how does this? So, make a long story short, it ended up being what was considered the 16th annual International Cajun Joke Telling Contest at the Yubilee Festival in Opelousas, St. Landry Parish. So there was 8 contestants, strict rules. You get up, you do your comedy. Professional media and professional scouts were there and judging you on cleanness of your jokes, authentic, how authentic you were with your Cajun accent, or was it fake or whatever, which by the way, I don't have one. Thank you, just got that. So I enter and I win. Okay. I'm thinking that's it. I'm done. That was my limelight and I'm finished. Unbeknownst to me, 2 weeks later, I get my first call to go and do a comedy for a corporate event. Baton Rouge, lady from Baton Rouge Corporation calls me and says, how much would you charge to come to Baton Rouge and do about 30 minutes for an annual luncheon? And true, I said, I don't understand. What do you mean charge? I could not fathom that someone was going to pay me to go and do Cajun comedy. So I called the lady that put on the organization of the joke telling contest, and she says, you don't understand what you can do with this, can you? I said, obviously I don't. So I worked very hard at it. I had mentors, Mr. Murray Comp, Mr. Dave Pettijohn, Kent Gonsalves, and AJ Smith, who all helped me, took me under their wing, and really did a good job. It probably knocked out about 15 years of trial and error. I took their criticism seriously and I applied it. What does that have to do with why I'm here this morning? Because probably in the 17 years that I've been doing comedy, that is my ministry back to the community. Do I charge for events? Yes, but I would submit to you in 17 years, probably over 100 events at no charge for nonprofits, for communities, for fundraisers, things of that nature. And it's a way for me to be able to take the talent that God has given me and give back to the community. Much like those that we're going to recognize this morning. So the community service part is what I think is so special about what we're doing this morning. And, a lot of times, and Judge Counsel, you'll say this, or you'll agree with it, I think. A lot of times when people become judges, they oftentimes think, well, I'm higher now, I'm better, and things of that nature. Well, I would submit to you this morning that I have to openly apologize, because when Mr. John called me to do this event, I'm embarrassed to say, but I apologize. I didn't know much about the Bar Foundation. And the reason being is because I think it is so important for all attorneys in Acadiana to become involved, to learn about specifically this morning, the Lafayette Bar Association and the Lafayette Bar Foundation and what it can do. And you're going to hear a lot of what it can do and a lot of why these attorneys are special in the Acadiana area. That what brings us here today is to recognize those attorneys who are oftentimes, I consider, public servants first and attorneys second. That's not easy to do. A lot of times when you're a public servant first and attorney second, you're not making all the money that some people think that the attorneys are making. But it's a community service. It's a ministry back to the programs that the Lafayette Bar Foundation offer to the community, allows the community and its citizens to see a side of attorneys. When I first ran for public office, 2017, I failed a calling to run for state representative. When I sat down with the consultants, okay, they said, take your website down, don't do any more comedy, don't do anything, because they're going to take those words, they're going to take the videos, and they're going to use that against you. What I found was opposite. More people knew me and related to me because of my comedy, because of my community service to them, than even as an elected official or an attorney. And that is what is important about recognizing these attorneys this morning. You know, the Bar Foundation, we're gonna recognize those that allow the community to have free service. Its citizens, it allows our citizens to see another side of attorneys. The most often it's overlooked, most often not seen, and unfortunately, the most oftentimes it is not recognized, the service that these attorneys do. Well, this morning, these attorneys are in fact going to be recognized and honored for their service. And again, that is why I'm so honored and humbled to be before you this morning, able to speak to you and touch base on how important the Lafayette Bar Foundation is, not only to the legal community, but their overall general community and our fellow citizens. Lafayette Bar Foundation, and I'm taking this and citing it from their website. Lafayette Bar Foundation, LBF, emphasizes the importance of giving back to the community through its various legal programs offered to the public. The foundation could not be successful without the attorneys who volunteer their time and talents. Without the contributions of the support and volunteers and partners, LBF could not have helped so many in our community in Acadiana and further the foundation's goal of equal access and justice for all. The foundation is grateful to its volunteers for the efforts they make to change the lives of those in need, and those volunteers will be honored this morning. Lafayette Bar Foundation provides pro bono, free legal education programs and guidance to indigent, low income, or disadvantaged within our community. These programs do not in any way replace the services that can be provided by hiring an attorney. In fact, they recommend if you have the means to hire an attorney, or they strongly suggest that you do if you have the means to do that. A list of the attorneys can also be found on their website. But this time, if you allow me, I'd like to mention some of those programs, and Mr. John will then come up and recognize those that's going to get awards for those programs. The HELP program, the Homeless Experience Legal Protection Program, was founded in November 2005 after Hurricane Katrina and Rita left so many desolate and in need of help. It was a huge impact on the lives of those who are trying to find, at that time, shelter and obtain jobs. Now listen to this, I think this is important. Without proper identification, shelters will not allow a person to stay overnight, and job applications are almost impossible. The HELP program, in fact, helps to smooth out this process for people without the financial means. Volunteer attorneys help homeless individuals obtain certified copies of birth certificates as sustainable documents to provide and prove their identity. Counsel on Call program. Counsel on Call program is a pro bono program which provides self-represented litigants an opportunity to privately discuss legal matters with volunteer attorneys. Participants are assisted on a first-come, first-served basis and are limited to a 15-minute conference with a volunteer attorney. Understand how important that is to those in the community that cannot afford even an initial consultation with an attorney. That is huge, y'all. Protective Order Panel. This program provides an attorney for clients that are in domestic violence situations and that have filed a TRO, temporary restraining order, in Lafayette Parish under Title 46. Referral cases from ALSC, Acadiana Legal Services Corporation, refers cases to Lafayette volunteer lawyers known as LVL for placement with a volunteer attorney. Most of the cases are referred are family law matters, bankruptcies, and simple successions. And lastly, seminars. During free legal seminars, a licensed attorney presents legal education on various topics including but not limited to divorce, child custody, tenant rights, and bankruptcies. These seminars are strictly to educate members of the community. The attorneys do not provide direct legal services, but how important it is for them to get that free, at least foundational education of the legal system and let them know what they're up against. So as I go to close, I'm going to issue a challenge. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'll publicly apologize for not knowing all of what the Lafayette Bar Foundation does. And I want to challenge those attorneys in Acadiana to step up, be involved, find your ministry in the legal profession, whatever that is, and move forward to be able to help those in the community that may not have the resources to do it. And what kind of keynote speaker would I be if I did not leave y'all with a couple of stories? So the first one I'd like to tell you, these are all true stories, documented. First time Mr. John and I met was actually at the Lafayette Parish Courthouse. Just so happened we were both on a docket, different cases, but both on the same docket. We were in front of Judge Castle. Well, we're walking in, and Judge Castle, she's on time. Don't be late. So I find this square-looking thing in the hallway. Many of y'all haven't seen it. I really wasn't used to it. And it had all kinds of stuff in it, chips and candy and peanuts and all these different things. So I saw it had 75 cents on it. So I took out $1 and I put $1 in there and I hit a button. I'd never seen this before. Bag of chip pops to the bottom. So I take that bag of chip and I look, I'm like, then a quarter fell. I actually heard change. So Mr. John goes into the courtroom. Judge Castle calls the docket, and when they called me, I wasn't in the courtroom. Well, thank goodness Mr. John remembered seeing me. He comes out to tell me, look, they're starting a docket. You need to get in there. I must have had 10 bags of chips. I must have had 8 Snickers, 6 bags of peanuts. And Mr. John says, JP, what are you doing? You need to get in there. She's about to call you. And I said, look, you're going to have to go and tell Judge Castle, I am not quitting until I stop winning. I have never been this lucky. So that's actually how me and Mr. John met. And as I touched on at the beginning, a lot of us have been through storms the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, especially Laura, to our friends southwest Calcasieu area. So when Hurricane Delta came through for Maine Parish, we did, get a good amount of damage, specifically at my house. So Mr. John calls me and he says, JP, is there anything I can do? I said, we just, got a little bit of shingle damage and things of that nature. I said, but Mr. John, I'll tell you what, I don't have a chainsaw. I said, we had a magnolia tree that had some substantial damage, got a limb on the home. He says, not a problem. He says, look, give me a couple hours. He said, I'm gonna drive down. He said, I'll bring you my chainsaw. You can about imagine how relieved I was. So he comes, he brings it to me. Didn't even get out, just drove up. I got it out the back of the truck. I said, thank you so much. He said, if you need something, let us know. So about 3 days later, he calls. He says, man, how's everything going? I said, well, it's slower than we thought, but it could always be worse. He says, look, I'm off this afternoon. How about if I come and give you a hand? I said, Mr. John, you don't have to, but I won't turn it down. That would be great. So when he drives up, I can see him kind of scratching his head. And I'm out there. I've been out there that day, third day. I'd probably been out 8 hours that day. I mean, sweating, just soaking wet. And I saw Mr. John kind of scratch his head, like, I said, what's John? He said, JP, it doesn't look like y'all got a lot done. I said, Mr. John, this is the 4th day. I said, we're doing everything we can, but everybody's damaged. There's a lot of stuff going on. He says, did the chainsaw help? I said, it did. I said, but it's still just a slow process. And he says, well, kind of show me what you've done so far. We go to a magnolia tree, and I showed him, in the last 4 days, I had this one branch. I mean, it was probably this big. I gotten that off in that haul to the road. He said, what else did you get done? I said, so far, that's all I've done. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I said, it's just, that's all the chainsaw can do. And he said, well, let me see, maybe it's something's wrong, it's not working correctly or whatever. So he primes it up, he starts it, and I mean, he takes off. So I stopped and said, Mr. John, I said, what's that noise? What's the noise on the chainsaw? You got that, Judge? And so let me wrap it up with this. So, everywhere as I travel, people always say, you need good Boudreaux or Thibodeau jokes. Like, that doesn't apply in Vermilion Parish. Vermilion Parish is Gaspar and Guidry. You might have a two-chet every now and then. Well, so Gaspar, his son walks up to him, got home from school. Son walks up and he says, Dad, he says, I have a question I need to talk to you about. His son was probably 12 years old. He said, not a problem. He said, son, I will always be honest with you. He said, let's sit down and have a talk. He could tell it was serious. So his son says, Dad, he says, we're talking about names in school and the origin of how someone gets a name, specifically a first name. And he says, a couple of the kids laughed whenever I told them my older sister's name was Paris. He said, so Dad, I'd like to be able to go back and explain why did your mom name her Paris? Dad looks down at him and he said, well, he said, son, that's actually where your sister was conceived, was in Paris. And we just thought it was so fitting that we would name her that. And he thought that was the coolest thing. He knew he'd be able to go back and explain that to the other students. So as he's walking away, son turns around and he says, Dad, he says, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for always allowing me to come to you with these important issues. And without hesitation, you're always honest with me. He said, no problem, Karen Girl. Thank y'all so much again. God bless y'all, and I hope everything goes well. Thank y'all.